Well, good morning. Glad to see you here. I want to tell you about my days in music ministry. The band reminds me how much fun it is to play music. Anybody here play music? Anybody? Nobody. Okay, cool. No, there's one guy over there. Okay, well, great. Well, when I used to play music, we had a guitar player who had a really unique way of changing his strings. He would take a big pair of scissors, and he would just lay them right across those steel strings and just cut right through them. Now, if you don't play guitar, that's not usually the way you do it, but it's really satisfying because the strings sort of explode into shrapnel and they shoot off. Well, this guy did this one time, and when he did that, he wasn't wearing safety glasses, and a piece of shrapnel from that steel string went right into his eyeball. And so he had a problem. He had his mother try to remove it. He tried to remove it. They couldn't do it, so he had to go to an eye doctor. And that eye doctor, I think, if I'm right, used a magnet to remove that piece of steel from his eye. Now, yeah, it is gross. I know. It's awful. But here's the point of that little story. Thank you. Here's the point of that little story. He had to show incredible discipline to sit there still while that eye doctor put his fingers in his eyes. That was really difficult. Now, I want to contrast that against another story. I have a big, arrogant cat named Lynx. My cat is, he's friendly to me, but he's a wild barroom brawler most of the time. If he meets another cat in the neighborhood, it's fight, fight, fight. If he meets raccoons, whatever. And one time, he came home, and something had bit him. I was like right here. It was all swollen up, and it was red, and he had a real problem. So I took him to his eye doctor, which is the veterinarian, and he did not behave quite so well as my guitar-playing friend. He went ballistic. Biting, scratching, clawing is like somebody had thrown a grenade in there. The vet actually had this method where he'd hold him by the back of the neck, the scruff, and he'd close the door on him and pin him between the door and the wall so that he'd claw like this, but he'd be back behind the door. I mean, he was going nuts, you know. So here's why I tell you that. We have an animal response to protect our eyes. You could take your thumb and do this, pretty much anywhere, and it'd be okay. But if you did that in my eye, we'd have a real problem. Your eyes are very sensitive. And so we have an animal response to protect the eyes. It's flinch or sweep your hand away or, move back, whatever it is. It's an animal response. It's an instinct to do that. But sometimes we need to control that instinct. Now, I want to show you the verses that we've been looking at for the past couple of weeks because they have to do with stuff in our eyes. Let's take a look. Jesus said this, "And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me remove the speck from your eye,' and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye." So, the first thing we pick up about this, and we've talked about this already, is this is a sensitive issue. We're talking about judging and being judged, and specifically about sin and things like that. This is a very sensitive issue, and Jesus uses this analogy so that we will tread lightly, so that we'll move into this, but be careful the way that we do it. Now, he tells the person who's going to do this to remove the speck from their own eye, and then they can do something in particular. Here's what he says, "And then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Now, here's the thing I want you to notice from this. A lot of times when we talk about judging others and being judged, we say, "Hey, man, don't judge me." Jesus says, "Hey, man, judge each other." That's what he says. But what we've learned in the last few weeks is that we need to judge with righteous judgment. It's possible to judge with unrighteous judgment. Jesus doesn't tell us to do that, but he tells us to judge one another with righteous judgment, and what we're doing is looking for specks in one another's eyes. That's what he's getting at. So let's just kind of take a look from a different perspective here. So in the last few weeks, we've looked at what does it mean to judge and remove specks, but this week we're going to look at what if you're the one who has the speck in your eye that needs to be removed? What if it's you? So we're going to turn this whole thing around, and we're going to approach it from the perspective of, what if it's me? What if it's you that's being judged? So the first thing we need to know is, what is a speck? And we've talked about this already, but let's just kind of go over it quickly. What is a speck? It's this stuff. This is a sort of an awful list of sins, but unfortunately I find some of my sins on this list. So here's some of the things that could qualify as a speck in your eye. Sexual immorality, fornication, adultery, homosexuality, envy and strife, gossip and slander, pride and boasting, disobedience to parents, unforgiveness, mercilessness, theft, drunkenness, angry outbursts, selfish ambition. Almost did it on one breath. So these are things that we can have in our life. These are sins that we can have present in our lives. And when we have something like this or some other sin that may not be on this list, that is what Jesus is talking about when he says we have a speck in our eye. Now, if you're like me, you probably can find at least one sin on this list that hits close to home. There's a few on this list that I look at and think, yeah, I've got those. And so what that means is Jesus is saying now we have a speck in our eye. And so if that's you, then listen up, because there's an important thing that we need to learn. Who is your eye doctor? So here's the issue that we face. If we have a speck in our eye, Jesus doesn't say go get a loan and remove it yourself. He says that we should be helping each other remove those specks. We should be helping each other remove sins from each other's lives. That doesn't sound like too much fun, does it? Having a sin removed from my life, that doesn't sound like very much fun. And so my question for you is, who is your eye doctor? Who's there for you that can remove specks from your eyes? Who is close enough to you that you would allow them to help you remove a sin or sins from your life? Well, let me just tell you some of mine. My eye doctors or speck removers, my parents were for a long time. I like to think of them as they were full-time speck removers. They were full-time doctors until they retired at my wedding, and that job went to my wife. So now my wife is my full-time eye doctor. It's part of the benefits package of marriage, but I've got some others. I have a mentor. If you don't have a mentor, I would suggest that you get someone to disciple you. This has helped me out a lot. Also, your kids. They're incredibly honest, and they say what's on their mind. They can be good at helping you remove specks from your eyes. Christian friends are really great at this, and sometimes even unbelieving friends can help you identify issues in your life, and that's a great source of help. Your small group. My wife and I are in a small group here at the church, and there are a number of really great quality people. I see some of you guys out there right now, really great quality people who are willing and ready to help in this endeavor to mature and grow. So these are my eye doctors. There's probably others on my list, but these are the ones that come to mind. So the question becomes, are you letting them do their job? So if you have somebody in your life that's willing and ready to remove a sin or help you remove a sin, do you let them do their job? Do you let them get close enough? It's hard to let somebody put their finger in your eye. It's harder to let someone help you remove a sin. So let's just kind of go through a couple of different stations in life. If you're not yet an adult, so I'm talking to you guys, I guess. Some non-adults over here too, but mostly over here. So if you're not yet an adult, what that means is you need someone to help you remove specks from your eyes. Your parents are a great source of this. Your friends can be as well. So if you're not yet an adult, I'm going to suggest that you allow your parents and your good Christian friends to remove specks from your eye. And here's why. Your life will be better. My life is so much better than it could have been had I resisted those sins being removed from my life. But you guys aren't the only ones in the room. If you're married, a lot of you look married. So how do you identify a married person? I don't know. You just look married. So many of you are married like I am, and if you're married, you have a built-in speck remover. The question is, are you letting her or him do their job? Or maybe the opposite is, have you ever resisted a husband or a wife trying to help you overcome one of your hang-ups? Well, I sure have. So that's something we're going to tackle today. If you're single, especially if you're a single adult, there's probably some of you guys single adults in here, you're in a particularly interesting place to me because you can live outside of accountability if you choose to. When I was single until I was about 27, which meant I had about a half decade that I lived by myself, a little over a half decade. I lived by myself, and I didn't really have a whole lot of accountability. And so it was sort of up to me to go out and find people that would help me overcome my sins. If we do it on our own, we are not as good. Jesus says we need to work together. So if you're a single adult, it's important that you think along these lines. And if you have kids, I want to share a story. I don't believe Bob's in the room. I think he's left, so I'll tell you this story about Bob. Bob told me this story. It's just a funny little thing. He told me that when his kids were young, he got mad. Hard to believe that he got mad at his kids, and he was, reacted in some way that demonstrated his anger. And Jamie said to him, "Dad, you're a preacher." And so his response was, his son, I think he didn't realize this at the time, but later, his son was helping him remove a speck from his eye. He was angry and responded out of anger, and Jamie was helping him to see past that and to overcome that. So our kids, the point is, our kids are a great source of honesty. If you are to ask your kids, especially if they're young, if you were to ask your kids, "Hey, what can I do to be a better parent?" Guess what? I bet they have an answer. That's hard. I mean, that'd be hard to do, but if you listen to them, let them tell you honestly, I bet they can come up with at least a couple of things. If it was me, it's probably about a dozen. So, are you letting them do their job? I want to tell you about a situation that I found myself in recently that sort of relates to all this. I'm trying contacts. And so, normally I wear glasses. You guys might have seen them, but today I have my contacts in. But I didn't wear contacts for a lot of years. I did when I was younger, and then I stopped because I had issues. I don't know. So I went back to the eye doctor recently, got a prescription, and he said, okay, now the next step is you got to try out different brands because different brands have different effects on people. And so he said, he held up the green box. I remember it was green, and he said, "This one's the cheap one." And then he said some other stuff. I was like, yeah, the cheap one. Give me the cheap one. So got the cheap one. I took it home, put them in, no problem. Man, they felt good. They felt about right. I wore them all day. And at the end of the day, I realized why they're the cheap ones. I couldn't get them out of my eye. It was like they got slimy or something. I just couldn't grip it. And I tried for quite a while. And I was sitting there pinching my eye. Now, my wife is in the room. She's kind of watching from behind me. And she said, "I can help you if you want." I'm like, no, I don't want help. I don't want your finger in my eye. You've been with the babies all day. I don't want your help. So I just keep trying. My eye's getting red, and I'm like crying. And so I tried a few different things because I didn't really want her to help me. So one of the things I did is I pinned my eye open, and I walked back and forth really fast, trying to dry it out, thinking maybe if it's dry, I could actually grip it, So I kind of was pacing back and forth the whole time. My wife's watching like, yeah, that's going to work. And so I did that for a few minutes while I'm just mad, So I tried. I couldn't get it out. Well, I had another idea. The whole time, Krista's sitting there watching. Krista's my wife. She's sitting there watching, saying, "I'm happy to help." No, I don't want to help. Where are the Q-tips? So I went and got a Q-tip. Oh, yeah, you know where I'm going with this. I don't know. It sounds like some of you had a Q-tip in the eye before. So I don't know if you've ever had a Q-tip under your eyelid. It's really a neat experience. So I got 2 Q-tips, and I kind of tried to use them like tweezers and pinch it and pull it, and it didn't work. And by this point, I'm really upset. I mean, I'm mad. And so I had another idea, because I still didn't want my wife to help me. I remembered that there was this suction thing that we had that, so we have an infant, or he's a toddler now, he was kind of an infant at the time. And there's this thing that you use on the nose that kind of sucks the congestion out. Yeah. So I went and found that. And I did clean it a little bit, but I couldn't find the soap. Okay, so I cleaned it, and then I just put it on my eye and just made a suction, and it actually did kind of pull it a little bit, but it wouldn't quite get it out. So anyway, I tried a number of different things. Here's why I tell you that story. I resisted getting help in that simple, silly little thing. I resisted because I can do it myself. I don't need help. I don't want the embarrassment of having to say, my wife has to get my contacts out. I was prideful. I wanted to be able to do it myself. And here's why I tell you that. I think that this relates to the way that we deal with our sin. We want to do it ourselves. Sometimes we identify a sin in our lives. We know it's there, but we don't want anybody else to touch it. And we recognize even that we need to get rid of it, but we don't want anybody else to mess with it. And so we refuse to let other people in to help. So, what is it when we do that? Well, Jesus actually gives a couple of names for when we act like that concerning our sin. He says this, "Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces." So here's what Jesus says. He says, if you respond in a certain way to when somebody's trying to help you, you're a dog or you're a pig. Now, I don't like calling you dogs and pigs. I like you guys. I think you're really cool. But this is what Jesus is using as an analogy. He's using this to help us to see how dangerous and awful it is when we refuse to let people help us. Now, remember, this verse comes right after the section we just looked at. So he's not talking about a different subject. He's talking about the exact same thing here. And he's saying that some people are not going to respond well to you trying to get that speck out of their eye. And think about our perspective today. I'm the one with the speck. So what this means is I'm the one that could be this. Yeah. Ugh. I have a problem with dogs, by the way. When I was in high school, I got chased down and bit on the back of the leg by a dog. Now, I'd like to tell you it was a big one, but he was kind of small. But he was the leader of a pack, and the pack was really scary. He really did have a number of other larger dogs, but he was the biter. I don't know. Anyway, I have an issue with dogs now. And so as long as they're, if they're small enough to punt, I'm okay. But the bigger dogs, I'm kind of afraid of dogs. And so if I'm walking down your street and your dog's cornered me and he's barking and you say, oh, he won't bite, I'm thinking, well, I'm still afraid of him. That's kind of my issue. So that's what I think about when I think of Jesus' term, dog. He's using it in a negative term. Certainly there's good dogs somewhere, but he's using it in a negative term. I bet, how many people have a dog? Yeah. So I'm kind of outnumbered. Okay, so anybody have a pet pig? No? Okay. So he also uses this analogy of swine. For the early Jewish audience, swine were an unclean. Actually, both of these were unclean animals, and so the swine were just not cool. They were dirty. They were dangerous. This is an African warthog, by the way, probably similar to some of the kind of pigs that were in their area. And these are dangerous. I actually had a hog issue at the house I used to live in when I was single. I was always afraid they would come and tear up the yard. I was always afraid I was going to get pinned out there. So I have really a negative connotation to what Jesus is saying. And guess what? This could be you. This could be me. And so we got to remember that. Jesus isn't saying, spot your friendly dog. He's talking about this in a negative way. We could be a dog or we could be a hog, depending on how we respond. So let's just kind of break down what Jesus is saying here so we can understand what it means to be a dog or a hog. So the first thing we see here, let me go back. First thing we see is, do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine. So here's kind of the image here. In the temple, there were all kinds of holy, sacred implements, like golden things, utensils, and different various things that craftsmen had to make. And those holy things were really valuable to anybody that was of that religion. But if you take those holy things and you give them to a street dog, just a stray, how's he going to respond? Well, he's not going to care about it. They're not going to be holy to him. They're just going to be stuff to trample on. In the same way, pearls, really valuable to us. It takes a lot to go get pearls, a lot to shine them up, or I don't know what people do with pearls. They do something and they're valuable, but to pigs they're not valuable. So what do we find out first? It says that they trample them under their feet. So here's the first thing we find out about what it means to be a dog or a hog. We can have no appreciation. When someone comes to us with something valuable, constructive criticism, if we have no appreciation for that, then we're responding like Jesus said here. We're responding in a way that he would call hoggish or doggish. I like that. So, here's the other thing. It says, and that dog or hog will turn and tear you in pieces. So the second thing we learn about responding like a dog or a hog is that there might be an aggressive response. So, if you do either of these, then you're responding like Jesus is talking about here. And guess what? You're in danger, if you respond like that, of the person not helping you. Because notice what Jesus says. He says, do not. So that means if I respond poorly when someone tries to give me constructive criticism, that constructive criticism might stop coming. And they would be justified in that. Jesus says, leave it alone if they respond this way. So I could build a place for myself where nobody can approach me about my sin or my hang-ups. And that's a dangerous place to be. So let's just kind of look at what this would mean for us. A dog or a hog doesn't appreciate the help. They might ignore advice. They might withdraw. Now, here's something that I think is important to see. So some people will respond like this, but they may not have like an aggressive, angry response. What they might do is withdraw or give the silent treatment. And so I know for me, that's sometimes easier than flying off the handle, but that still qualifies. You might give excuses. I'm the type that gives excuses when my weaknesses are shown. Might become defensive. Might get angry at just in general, or might even turn and attack the person that's trying to help. If you recognize anything on this list, then you might fall into this category. I know that I have at certain times. So I want to give you some examples. I think examples help us. So I knew a man who grew up in a godly family, grew up going to church, but when he got in college, he got into what I would call a party lifestyle. And he did it because he was addicted to sexual immorality of various kinds. So that was his vice of choice. And he lived like that for quite some time. Now, while he was in college, he still felt compelled to try to go to church from time to time. I don't know if it was parent pressure or what, but he would go to a church every once in a while. But he told me in those years that he would gladly stand up in the middle of a sermon and stomp out. I'd say, well, why would you do that? What's the big deal? And he said, well, because the preacher was talking about sin. And he recognized that he was living in sin. He had a speck in his eye, and the preacher was trying to remove that speck. And he said, no, thank you, I'm out. And so he did that while he was in college. Another example from domestic life, I knew a man who was married for a while, and he had an issue with his temper. He would lose his temper and he would break stuff around the house. And sometimes that temper would get turned toward his wife. When he would have one of these temper issues, he would often go and drink after that and get drunk, and then his behavior would not improve. And so his wife wanted to try to help him, like all good wives do, and she brought some of this to his attention, tried to help him see that he had a speck in his eye and it needed to be removed. The way that he responded was to turn it around. He said, the real reason why we're having a problem is because you're not keeping the house clean enough and you're not doing the dishes the way I told you to do them. And it's really all of that stress that causes that makes me drink. Very doggish or hoggish, in my opinion. That is how a dog or a hog would respond. Another example, I've actually heard this happen a number of times. So this is sort of a mashup of a number of these types of stories where there is a gossiper who's going through the gossip circuit and comes to somebody who calls him out on it, who says, that's gossip, you shouldn't do it. And often what happens in that situation is that the gossiper just puts distance between themselves and the person who called him out. And I think often that's what we do. When someone calls us out, we don't always respond in anger, but often we may just separate or move away from them. So, here's my question for you. How do you respond if someone confronts you about your bragging or exaggeration? Maybe that's your issue. How do you respond if somebody confronts you about gossiping about a fellow church member? How do you respond if someone calls you out about your envy of your neighbor's stuff? How do you respond if someone confronts you about unforgiveness? Maybe you can't forgive your deadbeat dad and your spouse says, it's time. How do you respond to that? How do you respond if someone confronts you about your lack of mercy for a coworker's mistakes? How do you respond if someone catches you and confronts you about your internet porn addiction? How do you respond if someone calls you out for cheating on your taxes? How about your drunken behavior? Someone confronts you about that. How do you respond? This is the big question. How do we respond? What do we do? Now, this is not all that complicated. You could respond like this. You're totally within the boundary of the human nature to respond like this. You could do this. This could be you. This could be what you do. Or you could respond this way. I heard a yay. Exactly. I think if when someone confronted you with constructive criticism, if you said yay, that would be the right response. That would be a response that makes sense. Because if someone loves you enough to confront you, now I'm not talking about situations where somebody's just trying to pick a fight or trying to belittle you. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when somebody judges your actions righteously and realizes that you need help and they confront you. Your response should be yay. It should be thankfulness. It should be celebration. Because you know what it means if you remove a speck from your life? If you remove a sin from your life, it means that you have a greater opportunity to gain rewards in eternity. It means that your relationship with Jesus can be more intimate and more close. That person is helping you in a way that will affect your eternity. So it should be yay. It should be thankfulness. It should be thank you so much for caring enough to approach me with this. Now, I know that's hard. And I know sometimes we have a gut response that isn't right. But I'm going to suggest in situations where you've done that, where you've responded in a bad way, return to it. Be thankful and thank the person for being brave enough to confront you. I want to tell you about a situation for me. I want to be vulnerable with you. I like to talk about my failures because they're funny. I don't talk about successes very often, but I want to tell you about, I think, what is a success in my life and my wife's life, actually. So when I was single, I had a video business. I would shoot videos, commercials, stuff like that. It was very technical, and most of my time was taken editing video on a computer. And so I did that for a number of years, and my office was in the house when I wasn't out shooting somewhere. And so when we got married, my wife discovered something about me that she didn't know, and it was that I would have outbursts of anger. Now, let me clarify, my outbursts of anger almost never, could say never, are toward another person. That's where I draw my red line. Everybody has a line that they try not to cross. That's where I draw the line. I don't have outbursts of anger toward other people. My outbursts of anger are violent, and they're toward my computer most of the time. And that sounds funny, but if you were in the room when I had one of these, I would be incredibly embarrassed. It's partially why it doesn't happen with other people. But the thing about marriage is you reveal yourself in ways, spiritually that you wouldn't in front of other people. And so Krista, having a desk right next to me in our home office, began to see that I acted very childish every once in a while. It's quiet, it's a lovely day, and then suddenly I'm banging my hand on the desk, I'm cussing the computer out, I'm stomping out the back door. Oh, and he's breaking something in the backyard. How strange. And that's her experience. She's seeing this from what is going on? And then when I would come back in and she'd try to have a conversation with me about it, I'd give excuses. I'd say, oh, the client is just, or the computer's so old, it's smoking. Whatever it was, I would give some excuse, I would be defensive, and I would deflect, and I would not change. Ultimately, that's what I was saying. I'm not willing to change. I'm not willing to make this change, even though that's what you want. And she made it clear. She's very gentle, but she made it clear this is what she wanted, is for me to stop this awful behavior. Well, time went on, and we talked about it a number of times. I was kind enough about it, but really just didn't fix it. And then we had kids, and Eiley began to be part of our daily life. And my office was in the house, and so as she began to grow, we realized, oh man, she's going to grow up in a house where she's seeing me do this. This isn't good. I got to get this under control. And so around that time, I had been responding like this, but I began to shift toward responding like this. Now, I didn't feel this way about it right away. I mean, it took time for me to begin to try to soak up this feeling of thankfulness, but I tell you what, I feel this way now. So I allowed Krista to begin to remove that speck. Didn't happen right away. It took time, and we began to brainstorm on what can we do to help this stop. And that took me putting my pride down. It took me allowing her into my life in a very vulnerable way, something that as a single person I just had never really done. And this is not the only thing like this. Over and over in our marriage, things like this come up. And so I was telling somebody this story this week, and they said, oh, when you were talking about judging, I was thinking of big situations where they're really uncomfortable. I wasn't thinking of these kind of daily things. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about specks in our own eyes, sins in our own life, and letting other people come in and change them. And so I am now very thankful that she was brave enough to confront me with the constructive criticism that I needed. So, with that said, I want to answer two quick questions. Number one, what if they're wrong? Now, this is a possibility. Somebody could come and confront you. They could come and do it in love. They could give you constructive criticism, but it turns out that they're wrong about their judgment. Now, when I first wrote this down, I thought, this will be easy to think of examples. Let's see. So when has that happened to me? When somebody's confronted me and they've been wrong. And I spent about 20 minutes trying to think of an example, and I couldn't think of any. Not in situations where somebody in love had approached me and told me something that was actually inaccurate. Now, certainly there's times when I've stepped on somebody's toes or, we've had a confrontation. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about times when someone in love wants to help you grow and they want to help remove a speck from your eye. And I couldn't think of a single situation in my life where somebody had been wrong when they did that for me. Now, that's not to say it can't happen, but here's the bottom line for this. The response should still be the same. We should still be thankful that we have a friend that loves us enough to approach us with that kind of constructive criticism. And so if you respond like a dog or a hog because somebody's wrong, you're still the one that's in the wrong. So we need to respond with thankfulness. And how cool is it if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I think you have this sin in your life. And I say, actually, I really appreciate you coming to me. I don't, so let's celebrate that I don't have the sin. We can celebrate together. We can be thankful. So if somebody's wrong, we still don't act like a dog or a hog. We still need to have thankfulness for that interaction. Here's the other. What if somebody gossips about you? What if somebody makes a judgment about you or about me, but they don't do what Jesus says? They go and they gossip. They go and tell people about that weird bunion on your toe or whatever it is. They go and gossip. I guess that wouldn't count because it's not a sin to have a bunion, I hope, because, well, anyway. So let's say they go and they gossip about you. Guess what? Now they have a speck in their eye. And Jesus tells us very clearly what to do when we recognize that somebody else has a speck in their eye. We go to them and we give them the constructive criticism that they need. Now, they may respond like a dog or a hog. They may get aggressive. They may get angry. But if they do that, Jesus says it's okay to leave it alone. But our responsibility is to remove that speck if it shows up in their eye. And how cool of a situation if somebody's gossiped about me and I go to them and say, hey, I really think you gossiped about me. I'd love to try to make it right. I'm helping them remove their speck, and then I'm giving them an opportunity to remove my speck. This is the give and take of Christian community. This is how it should fit together. So, we could do this, but I hope we don't. I hope you don't act like this. I hope I don't. I'll probably act like this week, but I'm going to try my best not to. I'm trying to outgrow being a mangy mutt or a tusky boar. I don't want that in my life, and I hope the same for you. So here's what it should look like. Here's my final thought for you. When you're judged wrong or right, be thankful and don't bite. Let's pray. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for your word. This simple idea, I think, can help us in the way that we interact with each other. I pray that we would use it this week. I pray that when we are getting constructive criticism, even in the next few days, that image of that angry dog or that boar would pop into our minds, that we would remember we need to be loving and kind and thankful. I pray, Lord, that you'd help us to remember our own forgiveness that you've given us when we deal with the people around us. I pray that this week we would make those decisions that would honor you and make you proud. In your name, amen. Thank you, guys.